Hello, everyone, and welcome back to In Her Element. I'm Swati, your host, and if you're new here, I'm really glad that you found us. And this is season 3, and I wanted to start this season with a question. This is not a big or philosophical question, but it's definitely a quiet one. The kind that you might push away on a busy Wednesday and only let yourself really sit with it at night. And the question is, does your life actually fit? And not in the way that does it look good or does it make sense of paper? Have you ever worked, have you really worked hard for it, or not even have you earned it? Or would anyone who loves you would be proud of it? But more like, does it actually fit? Does it feel like it's completely yours? And season 3, I call it Her Own Terms. And I want to be honest with you about why I chose the name Her Own Terms, because I think it sounds simpler than it truly is. Living on your own terms. It sounds like something that you'd find probably on a motivational account, but I think it might actually be one of the hardest things that any of us is asked to do, especially when the terms that we have been given from our families or our cultures or even our careers or our own ambitions have felt for so long like the only terms that were available to us. So the first episode is called The Life That Actually Fits. And I want to start it with something that happened to me a few years ago. So I was in a conference room one afternoon, and let's say I think it was a Thursday afternoon, late November. And it was the kind of afternoon where, the light outside just gives up around 3 o'clock. And the fluorescent lights make everyone look a little tired. I was surrounded by people who were, by any measure, impressive. And by most external measures, so was I. I had a medical degree a few years into my PhD work that genuinely mattered. And someone at the table said something, and I don't even remember what it was now. And I had this thought, like this very quiet, very still, like something slipped under a door. Is this it? It was not a spiral, it was not a crisis at that point, just this thing that I was building toward. Because I had arrived and I was sitting there wondering why it didn't feel more like an arrival. And I think a lot of women know that feeling. Maybe you're sitting with a version of it right now. And I think one of those reasons we don't say it out aloud is one of the reasons it feels almost ungrateful to name is because we are afraid of what it might mean. If I have done everything right and it still doesn't feel right, what does that say about me? I want to sit with that for a moment before we go anywhere else. And here's something that I've been thinking about a lot, which is the idea of performance. And not the performance as in pretending to be someone that you're not, but the performance as in the version of yourself you are running when other people are watching you. We all have one. And let's be honest, we really do. The version of you who gives the confident answers in the meeting, even when you're not totally sure. The version that sounds certain when someone asks how things are going. And the one who keeps moving, keeps delivering, keeps checking boxes. Because the boxes are familiar, and familiar feels like progress. And stopping to ask whether you actually chose those boxes feel like a luxury that you haven't earned yet. And there's a version of a good life that most of us inherit before we are old enough to question it. Work hard, achieve, become something, arrive somewhere, be useful, be impressive, be the person other people can point to. And I'm not saying those are bad things to want. A lot of them are genuinely worth wanting. But there is a difference between, you know, choosing something and inheriting it. Between, running towards something and running because that's just what you do. And the question I'm asking in this episode isn't, should I have wanted the things I wanted? It's, did I ever actually stop to want them for myself and not because it will look nice? And I want to talk about something that tends to get erased in the way we talk about success. And it's this: there's a specific kind of tiredness that comes from achieving things you don't actually want. It's not the tiredness of failure, it's not the tiredness of working hard and coming up short. It's the tiredness of working hard and arriving exactly where you planned, and it's still not giving you what you're hoping it would. And I think women, particularly women who have worked incredibly hard to get somewhere, are especially susceptible to this particular exhaustion. Because when the cost of getting there was high, stopping to ask, but is this what I wanted? Feels almost like betrayal of everyone who believed in you, of the version of yourself you who sacrificed to actually get here, and of the women who didn't have the chance to ask this question because the door wasn't open to them yet. I trained in medicine. I come from a family where education and achievement aren't just values. I'm an immigrant woman in academic spaces that were probably not designed with me. And the question of whether my life fits, whether I built it for me or for someone else's idea of who I should become, that question has lived with me for a very long time now. And I want to say this as clearly I can. Asking that question does not make me ungrateful. It makes me honest with myself. Now, I want to describe this feeling with very three different ages. You can actually understand what I'm trying to say. Because I think it sounds very different depending on where you are in your life. But underneath it, I think it's pretty much the same. At 22, it sounds like everyone else seems to know exactly what they're doing. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. I got into the program, I'm showing up, but I keep waiting for someone to tell me whether I actually want this or whether I just want to want it. And at 35, it may sound like I built the thing, the career, the credentials, the life. And sometimes I look at all of it and I feel not grateful exactly, more like confused. Like I opened a door I spent years working towards and found a room that was smaller than I had imagined. And at 52, it might sound like I know exactly who I am. I just don't know how many more years I want to spend performing a version of myself that I assembled 20 years ago for circumstances that no longer probably exist. Now, they are different ages, different circumstances, but the feeling, it's same. The feeling of having arrived somewhere and sitting quietly with the question of whether you wanted to actually go there. And as I do in every episode, I want to bring some research in here because this is what I do when something is sitting with me. When I'm trying to understand not just my own experience, but the patterns inside it. I go looking for signs and what that sign says, because either you can talk to people who have had lived experiences, which is I think a great way of taking this off your chest, but sometimes science is also lived experiences that have been communicated in form of science. So, and what it says on this particular question is both validating and also a little startling. So the gap between the achieved and the desired. A 2023 American Psychological Association survey found that 67% of women reported a meaningful gap between the life that they achieved and the life that they actually desired. And this was not in terms of material circumstances, but in terms of alignment with their values and sense of self. That number held across age groups, career levels, and educational backgrounds. 67%. And that is not a fringe experience. That is the majority of women across ages, across careers, across all kinds of backgrounds, reporting some version of what I was feeling in that conference room. A gap between what they had built and what they actually wanted to be living inside. And here's where the research goes a layer deeper. It's not the achievement, it's the meaning behind it. So, a research that was published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people who pursue goals that are intrinsically motivated, that are actually driven by genuine personal meaning, real interest, their own values, report significantly higher well being than people pursuing goals that are driven by approval, prestige, or obligation, even when the externally driven goals are achieved. The achievement itself isn't the variable. What the goal means to you is. Think about that in your own life for a second. Think about the goals that you are currently working towards. How many of them feel genuinely yours, which are, chosen from the inside? And how many of them are things that you probably inherited or pursued to be safe or kept moving toward because stopping to reassess it felt too costly? Because, like my previous episode, your body already knows. Research that was published in Psychosomatic Medicine found that sustained incongruence between a person's actual life circumstances and their core sense of self was associated with elevated cortisol levels, disrupted sleep, and increased inflammatory markers. The body registers the gap, not just emotionally, but also physiologically. Body probably knows this before you even do. When you're living inside a life that doesn't quite fit, that low level hum of tension that you have gotten so used to, you have stopped noticing it as a tension and started thinking that it's just who you are. That's not a personality trait, that's actually a signal. I say this not as a clinician trying to diagnose anything in you. I say it because I recognize it. I have been that woman. And I think a lot of you listening now recognize it too. And now let me name the fear because I think it needs to be said. The fear isn't that the life you built is wrong. The fear is what it would mean if you stopped and asked whether it fits. And the honest answer is that it doesn't. What do I do with that? Where do I go from there? What does it say about the choices that I have made, about the people I made them for, about who I am? And if I'm not the version of myself that I've been building for 20 years? And I think that fear of what looking honestly might unlock, is exactly why so many women don't ask the question. Not because they don't feel the gap, but because the gap feels safer to live with quietly than to look at directly. And here's what I have come to understand from research and from my own life, and from sitting with the stories of women I deeply respect. The gap doesn't go away when you don't look at it. It grows, it gets louder, and it starts costing you more in sleep, in health, in the sense that somewhere underneath the performance, you've lost track of yourself. And at some point, on a Thursday in a conference room or at 3 in the morning, or on some ordinary day that probably turns out to be not so ordinary after all, the questions come anyway. So, this is an invitation to ask it now before it gets too louder and before it starts costing you more. And what does permission actually look like in practice? I want to be real about something because when we talk about living on your own terms, it can sound enormous. Quit your job, move somewhere new, burn it all down and start over. And for some women, at some point, maybe it is that big. But for most of us, and what that research actually supports is, it starts much quieter. So, giving yourself permission, looks like telling the truth to yourself about one thing, one area where you've been performing rather than actually living your life. It looks like noticing it, not acting on it, just noticing where you feel like yourself and where you feel like a version of yourself that someone else drew. It looks like asking in the privacy of your own mind, if no one was watching this decision, what would I actually want? Because research in self determination theory out of Desai and Ryan's work at the University of Rochester found that the single most impactful factor in a woman's long term life satisfaction was what they call value behavior alignment. The degree to which daily choices reflect genuinely held values rather than internalized external expectations. So, this is not some dramatic external overhaul. This is alignment, honesty, the willingness to sit in the question before you run towards an answer. And I want to share this before I close. A conversation with a woman I admired, a physician who was a few years ahead of me, someone whose path I have watched from a distance and thought that she'd figured it out. We were talking about career, research, and all of it. And she said something, and I've thought about that many times since. I spent 15 years becoming the person I thought I was supposed to become. And then I spent 5 years realizing that person was real. She just wasn't the only real person that I was. Now I sat with that a lot. The idea that the life that you've built, even the life that doesn't quite fit, contains something real. You weren't wrong to want it. The version of you that pursued it was genuinely you. She just wasn't all of you. Her own terms doesn't mean erasing who you've been all the time. It just means making room for who you actually are or want to be or want to look like in a couple of years. And I want to close this episode in the way I want to close every episode this season. This is not with giving you an answer, but with a question for you to ponder over. Because I don't think the most useful thing this show or this podcast can do is to tell you what to do. I think the most useful thing is to give you the space to hear yourself think. Where in your life are you living someone else's version of you? And where are you actually home? What would your life look like if it actually fit? You don't have to answer it out aloud. You don't even have to do anything with it today. Just let it be there. Probably on your commute or while you're making dinner in that quiet moment before you fall asleep. Think about it. Now, thank you for being here and for season 3. I'm Swati. This is In Her Element, and I'll see you for episode 2. And if this episode landed for you, share it with a woman who needs to hear it. That's how this show grows, not through algorithms. I'm not looking for it. Through women who are passing things to each other. Research, citations, and episodes note are in the link in the bio. And if you want to keep the conversation going, I'm on Instagram at inher.element.podcast. Tell me what landed. Tell me what questions you're carrying. I read everything. And I'll see you there for the next episode. Bye. Take care.